So the name of our session today is What I Wish I Knew Then, Lessons Learned Designing and Managing State Data Systems. Assuming that you are in the right place, we'll show you today's session objectives on the next slide. And I'm honored to be here with my colleagues who will introduce themselves in just a minute, Robin Nelson and Gary Harmon. There's a couple of things that I heard today or thought about listening to the plenary sessions, and I hope that you all had an opportunity to do so. I thought our speakers did an excellent job sharing compelling reasons for having good, robust, comprehensive data systems. And then I was struck with the fact that I have never seen a perfect data system, and I doubt that I ever will. And so we're all forced to deal with the data system or systems that we currently have. And our goal here is to help each other try to make those systems what they can be, to do the things that we really need to be doing with that data. We are going to ask you to use the chat box today liberally throughout the session, and we have two dedicated spots about halfway through and towards the end of our session where we are going to handle the chat. But please go ahead and put your questions, your comments, exclamations, whatever you have in the chat throughout. It may be that we've already addressed the issue, and it may be that something that we will focus on. I've also taken a look at the participant list for this, and I'm honored that there's so many of you with great experience around data and data systems, and I look forward to hearing and seeing what you also have to say. So we're interested in those take-home, those critical pieces around your data systems, what's worked for you and getting them in place, what have been the challenges to those, and so we will proceed from here. We each have a minute to introduce ourselves. My first one is me with a giant root that I dug up. We did quite a bit of logging last year, and I needed to get this root out. In addition to that picture, I've been around special ed data for 36 years now. I was a Part B, Oregon Part B and Part C data manager for 9 years. Had a company that developed special education data systems, worked for a half a dozen OSEP-funded technical assistance centers over the years since 2005. And have worked from DAISY since its inception. Love my tractor, love my backhoe. I get to introduce now Robin to share a little bit about herself. Robin?
Hi everyone, this is me in my natural environment, hiking in the mountains. You can see my background there. I won't read that for you, but I just want to express my kind of goal and philosophy of TA is to really help states and local staff both design and use data systems to make their work easier, to make their work more efficient, to save them time in whatever ways I can. So that's it.
Hi all, I'm Gary Harmon. I'm also a DAISY consultant, former Part C data manager, an epidemiologist, and I've been building data systems for a little while. Like Robin, my philosophy is really around, what's the data that you're collecting and how are you going to use it, because your system needs to work for you, not the other way around. So this little picture is from last Halloween when I was an Angry Bird. I have a 7-year-old who loves Angry Birds. So, and my 10-year-old was born on Halloween. So always love to dress her up every year, but I spared you all the costume for this call. So just to talk about what we're going to generally set levels for what we're going to be discussing today, is that the content today that we're going to be talking about and asking for you all to contribute is really relevant to multiple IDA data systems. So we don't want to stick with like one particular kind. It doesn't have to be, an IFSP, an IEP, child student level data, personnel. Really, it should be relevant across all kind of IDA data systems. And obviously there will be some considerations for certain systems, and where possible, we do discuss that. Also, we know there's going to be some differences between states, between their needs in a data system. So we try to take that into account wherever possible. And really today, we're really focusing on Part C and 619. So really the children 0 to 5. It doesn't mean we don't have that longitudinal data view in mind, but we know there's a lot of work being done around We love our acronyms, right? ECIDS, Early Childhood Integrated Data Systems, and SLDS, Statewide Longitudinal Data Systems. And we use a lot of great work being done at states around that, but that tends to be multiple programs working together on a larger longitudinal type system. Here, we're gonna really try to concentrate in particular about Part C and 619 data systems. It doesn't mean you couldn't have one that encompasses both Part C and 619, that's fine. But we're, like I said, we're really gonna just stay away from those terms of ECIDS and SLDS.
Yeah.
Next slide. All right, well, we're gonna go to the polls. We always like to start off by just finding a little bit about you and a little bit about who's on the call, and then also why you're here. So the first set of questions are related to some very important questions. The first one in particular is very important. We're gonna show both questions on the same poll. So hand on your heart, are you wearing PJs right now? So you're, not me, I'm dressed for success, 100% yes. Business on top, PJs on bottom. I'm not gonna say about me if that's me or not. I literally took them off a minute ago. So those are your choices. Again, we're just trying to have a little fun here, figure out what everybody's wearing on the call, because we know we're all working from home, or a lot of us are working, I should not say that. A lot of us are working from home and adapting to this new environment. But then we have a more serious question is, what is your role? And this helps us understand who's in the room. We did get a participant list prior to the, to see who signed up prior to today, but it's great to actually see who's in the room. So that'll help us. So just give you all a second to respond. The first one is still changing, but we got about, okay, 4 out of 10 dressed for success, ready to go, excellent. And about 10% still in pajamas. I love the honesty, thank you. Business on top, PJs on the bottom, yep. And then I took them off a minute ago. Yeah, I had to go into a session, didn't know it was gonna be needing a camera, so put on the work stuff, great. But now for roles. So you can see from the roles, I think everybody can see the results on the screen. They're still, I think, coming. Should we end the poll now, Mallory? You can see that we've got a high representation of Part C data managers, as well as Part B data managers, Part C coordinators, directors. We've got some TA providers, and then we have some other folks with us today too. We know that other folks includes different types of staff and federal staff and such, so great. Are we showing this on the screen right now, Mallory? I just want to make sure everybody can see this. Great, excellent. Just want to make sure you could all see the results now in front of you. All right, so while you give a quick look at that, we're going to go ahead to a second set of polls, a little more serious. And this is really for us to help us know why you all are here. So the first one is, why did you choose the session? We're asking you to just give us one answer here. There might be multiple answers, but so choose the primary reason. Are you considering thinking about a new data system? So we're really just in the thought process here. We have not started that. We're considering. We're actually planning for one, means you actually begun the planning process. We're currently developing a new system. That means you're in the process of developing the system as we speak. Rolling it out means the system's built, but you're really just in that release point of the system. Substantial enhancements to your existing system means you already have an existing system, but you're going to do some sort of data system enhancement. In general, we're talking about kind of major enhancement, not changing a field name or something like that. I contributed content to the session. We want to make sure presenters don't misinterpret. We did ask for some states to present. We're going to talk about that a little later, to present some information to us, which we then pass on to you all about lessons learned, knowing that the best lessons learned really come from those that are doing it in the states. And then finally, board and just decided that IDIO sessions have to be divided, and some come here and some go to the other ones, and you got the short straw and came to data system. So we can answer that first question. And then the second one is, what is your level of experience with overseeing data system development? All are almost new to me, so pretty much new to this whole field. Contributed some. I've overseen or managed one data system to the finish line. I've brought more than one to completion. Or I should be doing this session. My book on this topic is almost out. Ooh, okay. We already have someone who said yes to that, so. All right, I see the answers seem to be slowing down. Mallory, do you want to show the responses? Thank you. So you can see about a third of you are actually currently developing a new system, so very relevant to you all if you're in the middle of this. And about 26%, if you take these first two categories, are in the planning process or considering process. That's great. A few are rolling it out, a few are doing some enhancements, and a couple just drew the short straw. I get it. Sorry about that. Hope you learned something here while you're here. The second one is, what is your level of experience with overseeing data system development? We've got some, about 1 out of 5 people in the room are new to this. We've had some contributions, but about a third of you are overseen or managed new data systems to the finish line. And so we're going to be really looking in your direction, folks who managed the data system concepts in the past, getting to the finish line, those who brought one to completion, and especially if you should be writing the book on this, we'd love to hear from you during the session. Help us explain things that you're hearing, go into further detail, remind us of things that we may have left out. So really appreciate you all coming on board with that level of experience and being a part of the session. All right, great. Well, I think we shared the results out. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Robin, who's going to begin talking about our presentation today.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. We just wanted to acknowledge our state contributors. We went out to about 5 folks. We got 100% response rate back. We went out to these folks primarily because we've been working with some or most of them in supporting their work. Most of them have been developing something within the last 3 years. One is probably about 4 years out. Most of them happen to be Part C, primarily because those are the kinds of clients we tend to get, although we're certainly more than happy and willing to support Part C and their data system efforts. So thanks to Susan Evans from New Jersey, Noah Feldman from Massachusetts, Wendy Stutt from Montana, Dave Williams from Tennessee, and we had one state that chose to remain anonymous. Next slide. So we're going to organize our lessons learned in terms of 5 categories. They are, for the most part, arranged pretty sequentially, going from concept to contract, the early stage of thinking about it, planning it, maybe doing an RFP. We have another section on business requirements, one on technology, project management, and then deployment, post-deployment. We recognize there's going to be a little overlap among some of these categories, depending upon if you're, designing something versus developing something versus implementing something. But give us some leeway on where things go, and we'll give you that same leeway. If you're interested in things that don't come up in our lessons learned, we'd love to hear about either your own lessons learned or questions about those lessons. We have 2 5-minute chat periods interspersed among these lessons learned categories, and would love to get some interaction, some dialogue back and forth. So now I think Bruce is going to start us off on that first category.
So this slide breaks the rule of way too many words on the slide, but I will not break the rule and read it to you. The semi-good news is this slide originally had twice as many. Font was half the size. So my colleagues, rightly so, said, cut it down, as we did with each of these. So I'm going to pick out a couple of these and talk a little bit about them. They may be ones that are not quite as common as some of the others. The very first one says, do your homework and justify. I went into the Department of Ed as a Part B data manager, and after the first year recognized that their existing data system did not meet any expectations that I would have had prior to coming, and surely didn't meet my expectations once I was there. Went to my supervisor and said, my gosh, you guys need a decent data system here. And he said, Bruce, you just barely found out where the restrooms are. Don't tell me we need a new data system. So I went back to my desk and I started weekly meetings where I took notes. All the challenges with the data systems, the IT problems, the local problems with it, and I documented the heck out of it. And so then next time I came back to my supervisor, laid out with the data, the justifications for a new data system. Funding, of course, you've got to find. Another focus piece that has worked, I thought, very well in some states is an additional bank of hours. Credit to Tennessee, first place I saw it, where they decided they wanted, in addition to the vendor to build them a data system, they put in, I think, 200 extra hours as part of the vendor's bid to support the state for anything the state wanted that wasn't in the original RFP and contract. The state controlled those hours. Obviously, the vendor had input terms of how many hours it would take. But it was a great opportunity to circumvent all the change order paperwork that does happen if you've got to change a contractual and fiscal obligation. Another piece that I've used, and I think it works well, is to put in your RFP for a new data system, the approximate dollars that are available. Now, I know there's some pushback on this one, but letting the vendors know, just like OSEP typically does when they fund their work, how much money is available so that the vendors can budget accordingly, or not even bother with the proposal if it's something they can't do for that price. It tends to make your bids pretty comparable, and I have found that it works pretty well to put an expected range of what those proposals ought to target. Another piece that's been very helpful for me is befriend someone in procurement. Procurement is its own quagmire, as you probably know, of rules and regulations and policies and procedures that they have to follow. Getting somebody who you can consider at least a professional colleague to help you navigate that, I have found invaluable in the past and very helpful. And anybody who has been involved with the development of an RFP knows how much time they take. Double the time and then double that. Rule of thumb, it's going to take, I think, usually about a year to develop a good solid RFP. In some cases, depending on your own procurement processes, it can take a lot more than that as well. The other thing I would say is don't lock a vendor in. Don't over focus on how the vendor should do something. Focus on the end game. What are your goals? And Robin will talk more about those pieces in just a bit. But telling them how to do it, if it's agile or waterfall, or overemphasizing what kind of experience they've had to have in the past for them to be an eligible bidder, doesn't, I don't think, do the state any favors. Keeping it as open and for all vendors to consider how they bring their best experience and solutions to your challenge, I think works the best for you as a state or for a program or agency. To the extent you can, include your partners in this. By partners, I mean people at the local level, your stakeholders, your SICC, your committees, parent groups. I think those are all really important constituencies that have a vested interest in the data that will be collected. And I think my time is just about right. One more plug. When you review your proposals that come in, do your very best to pick good reviewers and calibrate those reviewers prior to their reviewing of those proposals that the vendors have submitted. All right, I see my 5 minutes is done. I think we're going to push it over to Robin.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. And we're all going to take the same kind of path here. We have a lot of things on the slide. We're not going to talk about all of those. We'll just each talk about maybe 2 or 3. But again, when we have time for the chat, you can bring up anything else that we haven't talked about or things that aren't even on the slide. So I want to talk about business requirements, and these lessons learned really represent a combination of how you gather business requirements as well as some kind of specific business requirements that were called out by states, like don't forget this, pay particular attention to this. What I wanted to talk about first is just the notion of, along with business requirements, and we know that's an iterative process, gathering all of those. We see a lot of focus on gathering business requirements, less focus on developing a process model, and even less focus on developing a data model. So you should be doing all of those. A process model is just a visual representation of how activities flow from referral to eligibility to IFSP or IEP, et cetera. And usually we kind of model the happy path, but there are also lots of the happy path being the common path. But we know with IDEA and the little I in IFSP and IEP, a lot of that individualization results in kind of tangents off of the happy path. So pay attention to those. If you're from Part C, you know that there are lots of kind of divergence depending upon that late referral to Part C and what that means for transition requirements. And then the data model really kind of outlines the data elements and the attributes and the organization of those things. And it's important, again, to realize that it's not just having the data element in your system, but the way that data element is connected to other data elements, in the same table, if it's connected to or linked to data elements in a different table. That's going to drive what you can do analytically with your data. So you should really give some thought to how your data model is set up, whether it's going to allow you to do the kinds of analysis you want to do. And it might also help if you're going to do any kind of data migration, helping you map from your old legacy system to your new data system. Wanted to talk a little bit about the comment from one of our states about choosing wisely with your required fields. And again, I think that's about there being a pretty healthy middle ground there, that it's not about requiring fields for the sake of requiring them, but how they allow or don't allow the user to go through the process, and when those fields are required, and when they prohibit people from going places in the data system where they need to go to but can't because the system is so locked down. So just kind of pay attention to those carefully. I think the general rule of thumb is that you may not want to allow your local programs or districts latitude in what they do, but you may want to allow latitude in how they do it. And so those required fields need to allow for that, and you'll probably find out differences in how folks do it when you're gathering your business requirements. And then lastly, I think is the caution, especially with COVID, to be a little bit more forward thinking. For those of you who have just developed something or in the process, you've probably run into a lot of things that are COVID related and think, geez, why didn't I design this in, or why didn't I ask for this, or is it too late to add this in? So COVID may not be the only catastrophic event in the life cycle of your new system. Other things I'm sure will come down the path. So think about that. Think about what other kinds of things you might want. For example, electronic signature capability, a parent portal. I'm working with a state right now that's in the middle of design, and they're trying to figure out some functionality to put parents on hold. We saw that a lot with COVID, parents saying, I don't really want to engage in services right now, get back to me in a month or so, even though they've already had an IFSP or IEP developed. So be forward thinking, not just in terms of catastrophic events, but the way, demographics are changing. We have a lot of young parents right now who increasingly like to interact more electronically rather than paper and pencil. So having the signature, having a parent portal that parents can get into the data system and do some of the work electronically, I think is becoming more and more popular. All right, we'll stop there and turn it over to, I think, back to Bruce.
Actually, I'm going to jump in here. We're going to do a little bit of discussion, or do you want to go to technology, Bruce, or do you want to, should we jump into a little discussion here?
How are we doing on time? Let's go to technology.
Okay, sorry about that.
Next slide, Mallory, and we'll jump back to the chat. And again, folks, the topics that we've talked about, the concepts to contract, to the business requirements and the technology, we're going to look for your insight as well. So a couple of key points on technology. 15 years ago for sure, cloud was hardly even a concept worthy of discussion at a state agency. 10 years ago, it started to gain a little bit of traction. Now I can't imagine a solution that's not cloud-based. That's a little bit of my bias. But even then, there are opportunities for different types of clouds. So thinking about what you can do and what your technology component of your agency will allow you to do around that. One of the challenges I've seen in systems is administrators not having access to the data, or not having access to all of the data, or not having access to all the data when they need it. And I think those are slightly different issues. But I would strongly encourage the ability for your agency administrator, the person on your staff, to be able to tap into that data set and pull down the data that she or he needs at any point in time. The other thing, let's talk about reports. We heard today at the plenary lots of opportunities for database decision-making, getting in valid and reliable, timely data into the hands of decision makers to do something about it. The reports that are in your system, be they canned reports for the most part, are so important that they are built well to the end users to interpret those data for their purposes. And yet, on the flip side, there's the complex reports, the one-off reports. And I'm not sure that those are best built into the data system. I've really become a proponent of the business intelligence tools that are out there, whatever your agency might have or your state has access to that you can tap into, and pulling your data down from your own extracts and then using those BI tools that for the most part are relatively easy to use. The data visualization is fantastic and they're constantly being updated by their respective creators. Differentiated dashboards for your users are extremely helpful, and to the extent that those dashboards can be customized by the end user for their own look and feel is always a nice feature. Backups, how much data can you afford to lose? There's always things that can happen. Would your field be happy with, 1 day's worth of lost data or only maybe an hour's worth of lost data? That's going to impact the backups and the frequency of those backups for you and for your system. Consider tablets, phones. To what extent are people able to use those? Do they make sense to interact with your data system? And then that, of course, can drive design features if, in fact, you are going to allow for phone and tablet access to your data system. Experience on this one wasn't always a good experience. Where we did testing with 15, 20 people in a room, system did great. However, put it in a real demand where you have a few hundred people using it for crunch time because of a deadline and due date, and the speed at which that system is performing is not adequate. So that's where I like to have the cloud, where you can easily roll up some capacity in that cloud system pretty easily. But make sure that your testing parameters are such that you're putting the expected high peak demands on your system. Thanks, Mal. Got your warning, and I will scan quickly. Nope, I'll go with that. Let's go to chat, Gary.
Great, Bruce, thanks. So what we're going to ask now is just a little bit of input from you all, if possible. We've heard about 3 different areas, right? We've talked about the concept of, well, not the concept, but we've heard about the concept of contract. That's one of the areas, business requirements, and technology. Anything that stood out to you all? And it says live chat, so you can feel free to unmute yourself and just speak up, or you can put it in the chat. We're monitoring the chat. But what stood out to you? Is there anything in there that you heard that right away you said, oh yeah, that was a big one for us? And if so, if you tell us a little bit about it. Is there anything you can add in those 3 areas based on your experience? Did we not hit on something that you thought, hey, that's probably something pretty important that I'd like that happened to us? I'd like to throw that in there. Or anything we just didn't mention at all? Anybody have any sort of follow-up to any of those 3 areas? It could be any of those 3 areas related to sort of the beforehand, the business requirements, and then the technology. Anything that we didn't mention or bring up that you thought,
This is Elizabeth from Arizona, and long silences make me uncomfortable. So I'm going to go first and share with you. As we're putting a child outcomes data system together for 619, we have come across, as we are picking out those data fields, having a data dictionary for our users to have available, that they know exactly what to put in that data field. It's spelled out for them, has been really helpful. And just like Bruce said, the stakeholders that were involved in putting that data dictionary together was crucial. So played a little offense, not defense, and it paid off in the end.
It's a wonderful point. Yes, documentation is so important, especially something around a data dictionary. If not everybody here is familiar with the data dictionary, it's basically it can be in Excel, it can be in Word, it can be in any format, but it basically describes the data in your data system. It can have lots of different information. I've seen data dictionaries look many different ways. We actually have a tool resource that we have later on in the presentation. So thank you for that, Liz, where we actually have a resource from Daisy around data dictionaries. So if there's information that you would like more information about data dictionaries, we encourage you to check out that resource, or please follow up with us. But yeah, documenting as much as you can of what's in the system or what will be in the system is extremely important. Anything else anybody can think of that lessons learned?
Gary, this is Cindy from Iowa.
Hi, Cindy.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
I think a lesson learned is the importance of stakeholder input from your data folks to your service providers and everyone else. And it's not just beforehand, it's through the whole process. Because as much as some of us think we know the flow of the work and everything else, absolutely we can't know it all. And it's so critical to have the users of the system's voice in the whole process, from the beginning where you started, Bruce, all the way to when we roll out a new system.
Another great
Yeah,
point.
Cindy, I agree. I think some local folks can be your best subject matter experts, right? At some local programs, you probably have people who do nothing but transition, and they know a heck of a lot more about transition maybe than even the state staff do. So yeah, it's critical.
Agreed, including the subject matter experts and stakeholders at every level and every part of the process. Very important. Thanks, Cindy. Appreciate that. I've got time maybe for one more. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to add? Let's see, we've got in the chat, building capacity for end users to consume new products, systems happens in tandem. You need to be intentional about this so folks are not overwhelmed at launch time. That's a really good point about when you roll out the system and how that gets rolled out to users and especially end users, and how that works in tandem with other systems. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in post-deployment, but that is a very good point. Thanks. Bruce or Rob, anything to add to that?
No, good discussion.
Nope.
All right, great. Well, that was about the time we had for discussion for this. We're going to have another about 5 to 7 minutes to do another discussion in a little while. So think about your questions as you're hearing us talk about the next two topics. Okay, Robin.
Yeah, so this is broadly project management, and I think it includes not just managing the project, but also involving people, personnel kinds of relationships, and communications, touching on some of the things that Cindy just brought up. One thing I want to point your attention to is one of the states saying you really need an experienced IT professional. If you have it, great. If you don't, hire someone. Her exact quote was, "It will be money well spent. You will never regret it." So sometimes those folks can be assigned to you from IT. Sometimes you hire them directly. Typically, they are come in the form of either a business analyst and or a project manager. Even if you're working with a vendor who has a project manager, it's always good to have your own internal project manager because there are different audiences and different needs there. The quote about not everyone's going to like it, so be prepared to defend your decisions and explain your rationale, I think is really critical. A lot of that goes along with involving stakeholders all along the way. When you start on a new system, it's often good to have a purpose statement or intended outcomes. So everyone understands why you're doing this, why you're developing the new system, and what it purports to do. And in fact, I think another part of that is just having a communication plan throughout the process, identifying what you're going to communicate to who the different stakeholder groups are, and how to communicate that. And then lastly, I think it's always good to have a face for the data system, a spokesperson, a point of contact, someone who people can go to. There will be a lot of phishing. People will try to find out information from various places or people, but there should be one point person where people can get reliable information about the status of things, et cetera. And then I think another important thing is preparing the field sooner than you think you need to. More and more, I think data systems are becoming less about collecting data and sending it to a centralized source and having people enter it, and really more about providers, practitioners using that system in their everyday work. So really paying attention to the kind of behavior change that you anticipate as a result of that new system, the kind of organizational changes that might occur and how to address those. I think that's where we're headed with a lot of these. They're almost electronic records, health records, medical records, education records, et cetera. And then finally, lastly, again, this kind of aligns with what Cindy is saying, and we had a bullet under business requirements about user permissions and access, et cetera. And I think people tend to think generally about the common, the users who are going to enter the system, enter data into the system, et cetera. But pay attention to the users of the system who will need access but won't necessarily be entering data, whether they're your budget folks, whether they're your program monitors or program consultants who might need read-only access, but access to several programs that are within their kind of caseload. Pay attention to their needs as well. Bruce, to you.
Actually, I'm going to jump in into some post-deployment stuff. Thanks, Robin. So you've built your data system and you've deployed it, and there's a few things to think about. But again, we don't want to start thinking about these post-deployment considerations after we deploy the system. We want to really think about these beforehand. So based on our discussions internally, our experience and the work of state staff, we try to compile some things to think about once you have deployed your system. But again, a lot of these will be things that we could have put in pre-deployment because they're things that you need to think about starting from the beginning. But so again, there might be a little overlap here with some of the other things we've discussed. But one of the things I want to highlight is the transitioning from an old system to a new system. And when I say old system, you may not have an old data system, but you do have some sort of system in place to keep records, whether it be paper, Excel, whatever it might be. You have a system. So you're going to be transitioning to a new data system. So how are you going to do that? What's the ways that you're going to prepare to do that? Mary's point was really to that, which is about how do you do this sort of, maybe so you have to do parallel training at the same time where you're training on the new system while talking about the transition to the old system. Are you using both systems at the same time? Is there a period where people are entering data in two systems or keeping data on paper while entering data into a new system? What about data migration? At some point your data is going to have to be moved into this new system. If it's from an older data system, maybe that can be done completely through an electronic process. It may not be available through electronic means. There may have to be manual data entry into your new program for this data. I hope that's not the case, but we know it does happen. So what are your considerations around that data migration of your existing data? How do you get that into the system? Maybe that won't be in the existing system. Okay, but then how are you going to make sure that those folks that are using the new system can access that old data? So these are things to think about in your post-deployment period. What about training and ongoing user support? So we know a lot of times you'll work with a vendor, you'll do an initial round of training, you'll develop maybe some training materials internally around new processes, or hopefully the vendor will help you with developing training materials around the actual system and how the system is used. But how does that continue onward? What about the ongoing professional development? You're going to constantly having new staff come on board. You're going to be having staff that are going to change roles. How do you make sure that new staff is trained in a very efficient manner like the original staff were trained? How do you update those trainings that you've already done, right? Things may change, the system may change. You may have things that you want to add to your trainings. Who's in charge of that? Making sure that those train pieces are in place. And as well as maintenance and enhancements. Bruce talked about this up front, having that sort of pool of money for enhancements and maintenance. But I will make a definitive statement here. You will want to make changes to your data system once it's built. That is just a fact. There's lots of reasons for it. There could be a change in your state process. You could have left something out in the bill. That happens. There could be new state or federal regulations. You could just, again, find a new way to do a process and want to add some screens or add some fields. But how does that happen? How are you going to make those changes? who initiates it, who's the one that's in charge of that process, how do you follow up with the vendor. So we really want to have some sort of method in place for looking at maintenance and enhancements. How do you decide which maintenance enhancements occur, right? Because you might deploy your data system and you may come back with 50 suggestions, 150 suggestions. How do you prioritize those suggestions and say, hey, this is the one that, these are the top 10 that we really need to work on, and these 10 maybe we can wait for year 2. And that's really something to think about early on, because those things are going to come up with as you begin maintaining and enhancing your systems. And then the final thing I'll mention on this page, again, there's other things here, is think about a help desk or a ticketing system. It can be something very simple. We don't necessarily have to have a complex, hire a vendor who comes in and does phone call help desks and all that. You can have simple project management software that's available that can be used by the state to manage tickets and such. It's a lot of vendors do that. But you really should have something in place so that your users can report an issue with the system. What happens if something's supposed to work a certain way and it doesn't work the way they expect it? Who do they report that to? How do they report that? How do they then find out that problem is being worked on or that issue is being worked on? Or how do they know when it's been fixed? You know, and so those are all issues that you're going to have to sort of have with a post-deployment management plan. And so these are things to think about while you're building the system, because you don't want to be stuck in that post-deployment phase trying to figure out these things. I'm going to stop there. There's a few other things on the slide again that I mentioned that you could look at. We're going to pause here again and go back to do, actually, Mallory, before we go to this on the framework, we'll go back to that live chat slide, if you could, please. Oh, wait, am I doing this too soon? Oh, wait, I'm sorry. That's my fault. I jumped the gun here too. I thought we were going to start this. I'm sorry, Robin, you go for it. We'll come back to a discussion near the end. My apologies, Robin.
No, okay. Yeah, next couple of slides, we want to point out some technical assistance resources that we have available. We have the data system framework, and it is really our holy grail. I would call your attention specifically to the subcomponent on system design and development. The framework really kind of lays out the kinds of quality indicators that we think go into making up a high quality data system. So in system design and development, we lay out the activities and decisions that we think Part C and 619 staff should be involved in and be making. It's not a highly technical one. It is not geared toward IT, but rather to Part C and 619 staff. We talk about the kinds of deliverables or products you should come away with, be it a data dictionary, be it some representation of your data model, like an entity relationship diagram that lays out all of your database tables, et cetera. We talk about the kinds of things you should do routinely once your system is deployed. For example, updating that data dictionary minimally every time the regs change to see if that's needed, and perhaps more frequently. So highly encourage you to seek out the system framework. It's really a roadmap to follow as you're developing a data system. Next slide, Mallory. And here are a few other resources. The last 4 are PDFs that you can find online. Again, one that Bruce and I developed on process and data models, what they are, how to use them. A document on developing business requirements, a resources on data dictionaries. I want to particularly focus, though, on the IFSP information toolkit. It is a toolkit like some of our other toolkits, the Data Viz toolkit, the Data Governance toolkit. And even though it has IFSP in front of it, we think many of the features in that toolkit are applicable to Part C or Part B 619 systems as well. We identify a number of features and talk about what they do. We have state examples of either video of the state demoing that or some screenshots of how that feature works, what kind of considerations to take into account as you're developing it, as well as the kind of data elements that you need. So for example, we have features on electronic signatures, on dashboards, on notification and tickler systems, on wizards, involving wizards in your data system, And I would put a plug in here, if you have any other features that you want us, this is an ever-evolving toolkit. If you have other features that you want us to focus on, shoot me an email, or if you have really kind of innovative features that you want to share and allow us to post online, we'd love to do that as well.
So we recognize that we have crammed decades of our experience with data systems. Not only did we do that to you, we went out to colleagues that we knew who also had lots of experience and asked for their input for this session, and we have packed it. So now let me bring some reality to this, some good news reality. DAISY is a Center for IDEA Early Childhood Data Systems, right? We've got a lot of people like ourselves on staff who have been around this block. Some of us have been around this block before the sidewalks were paved. We've helped dozens of states with different types of IDEA data systems, and we can help you too. Here are some of the things on this slide, these bulleted points of things that we have done and can do with states. And I also want to bring out a nuance that we may not have stressed well enough before. It's great when you're in the design phase for a new data system, but many times you're not at that point. You're at I need a significant enhancement, a refresh about our data system. So what does that work look like and entail? And we can help you with that as well. Some of it may be the exact same designing features, new features into your existing data system. Some of it might be some new reporting capabilities, whatever that might be, but we can help with both enhancements and designing of the new. But we can't build your system for you. Let's just put that out there front. We can sure help you think through all the aspects of it, help you with the business requirements. We can even be alpha testers once your system is at a point where it's ready for that. And we do have some experience with that. Not just the three of us, there are many DAISY people on staff with that experience. So contacting us earlier rather than later, it's usually better for everybody. If we can get in and help you on the early pieces, that makes the latter pieces go better. But do contact us, tap us anytime. We actually, the three of us are pretty geeky about it and we really enjoy this. So we really do like to help states come up with the best system that they can. So that's what DAISY.
Bruce, one thing I don't see here that we can also do is help with user acceptance testing. I think our strength really is not only do we know data systems, but we know Part C and 619 really, really well. You tend to come to that knowledge by building systems like this. So we can help you set up various kinds of scenarios for user acceptance testing, et cetera.
Good point. We're gonna add that bullet UAT to this. I just made myself a note. Thanks, Robin. Good point. Okay. And Gary, now I think we go to the live chat.
Now we have our last final, we have about 5 minutes to talk a little bit about sort of everything you've heard here. To those of you who've done this before, what additional lessons learned would you add that we haven't touched on? It could be big pieces, it could be little pieces. If you give one piece of advice on this topic to somebody, what would it be? Do you take exception with anything that we've said here? Please let us know, we'd love to hear it. And then I do notice that we do have a chat. Someone, let me just pull that up. Alyssa wrote that building relationships between program staff and IT staff is important. IT have the knowledge of how to collect, and program teams have knowledge about what are important elements and reasons why the information should be collected. I think as you said that fantastically. It really can't be emphasized enough how important those relationships are. Sometimes folks in different places are speaking two different languages. So to have that relationship where you can actually talk to each other and figure out what everybody else is saying is super important. And I'd like to highlight that for any data system building you're doing. And I know Bruce and Robin mentioned that in their pieces as well, but this is really an important part of this, is getting your IT folks involved early and often. Anything else anybody would like to unmute themselves and tell us additional lessons they've learned? I looked about half people are either in the middle of a data system build or have been doing this for a while. So anything that you thought to yourself, oh, I thought I'd hear this today, but I didn't hear that.
This is Cindy again, and I have a sort of a comment about your the DAISY framework for data system, and where we assessed so low when we were doing that was getting Part C at the table in these state organizations early to be able to really be in the know and part of those discussions. And I don't know if there's a trick to that. We always seem to be a struggle to connect big projects that Part C is a little piece in, because we're building a Birth to 21 data system, so we're just a little sliver of it. And now we're pretty deep involved, but for those 3 years prior to having a vendor, all the work that goes on that we get self-assessed when we do the framework, we didn't do well in. So I don't know, that's more of a comment, I guess, than anything else is and any advice though to get people to the table earlier would be appreciated.
Yeah, thanks, Cindy, for that. Yeah, our scope of work kind of stops at, you know, some kind of longitudinal data systems, but certainly within our scope is to help Part C get to the table and to know and understand and carry out their role in those kinds of activities. So thanks.
Yeah, I think that's Bruce, I don't know, were you going to jump in? I didn't want to cut you off.
Cindy, your comment is a good one, and I think it also has application for 619 relative to their situation with Big B, if you will. The fact that your lead agency is education is also a factor that not everybody, that's not always the hand that they're dealt. Yeah, trying to get that communication as early as you possibly can, and how you do that, I think we could help with that. But there are situations within states that everybody's different. Gary, what were you going to say?
No, I just think, I think Cindy brings up a challenge that we find quite often, is that unless you're talking about a Part C specific data system where you're running it and you're the folks in charge and you're the ones that are leading the effort, it can sometimes be a challenge, because generally if you start comparing yourself to the Part B 619 program or the Part B program, and then if you get even to general education, it does tend to be a small piece. And so it really does depend on how that build is happening, who's the folks in charge. You know, if you're in health and they're building it over in education, that's going to be really challenging. Yeah, so those are the kind of things that I guess it's hard to say, find out what's going on when you don't know what's going on, but that really is a challenge, and we've heard that quite often. Just a couple minutes left. I'm seeing some great comments here in the chat box. I just want to get to them real quick. Someone wrote, Mary from Reuser Acceptance Testing, building a test environment was overlooked on a development project she was with. And don't forget to get your database manager vendor to build this in. Great point. Having some sort of test environment where things are not live that you can have folks go into and test and make changes. There we go from John. Test, test, test. I think you could probably write it another 5 times too. Test systems when development is complete. IT QA don't know your data like you do. And that is so true. I mean, you can have folks testing whether this button doesn't work, right? Or whether or not this, you know, checkbox is in the wrong place, but does it do with the processes that you need to do? Those are going to be your end users that have to do that. Dave wanted to mention that something he didn't hear was about considering post-deployment support, the ability to impersonate any and all users. Otherwise, you'll be on the phone and computer with users and their problems, which can be a scheduling hurdle. Yeah. Well, on my screen, it looks like this, but what does it look like on your screen, right? Those kind of things you want to try to avoid, right? So if you can log in as anybody or as any role or user with any permissions, you can hopefully recreate any issues you're seeing on the user's end. Alyssa wrote, also don't forget to build in elements to the contract in case the vendor does not deliver in the time frame. A lot of contracts include a time frame when activities should happen, but don't always consider contingencies of what if. So right, build in, I mean, generally when you release these data system RFPs, you have a certain time frame in mind where it has to be built by, when it has to be trained on, and when it has to be deployed by. If you see those issues coming in timelines, bring them up early, bring them up often, discuss contingencies, talk about potentially maybe only being able to deploy a part of the system when you anticipated, if that's all that's going to be built, or do you hold off and push things back? Those are decisions you'll have to make internally. But if the more you can put in your contract up front with your vendor to cover that, the more you'll be in good shape if things are not going along the timelines that you had anticipated. I will say in this work, and I think Bruce said it, whatever time you expect to take, double it and double it again. These things do take a long time, whether it be the writing the RFP process, whether it be to actually building the system, and then the post-deployment. We always want them to occur quicker than they do. But unfortunately, the realities of a large database, a large system, lots of users, lots of folks to train, lots of testing, it does take some time. Thank you very much for those great comments in the chat. Thank you for your comments, unmuting yourself. This has been really helpful, I think, to others. We really appreciated the input from you all. I'm going to hand it off now, if there's nothing else, to Bruce to close this up.
Thanks, Gary. I wanted to make one comment. Cindy, I heard something and then I didn't add to it. You referenced the DAISY Data System Framework, and you said something like you kind of scored low in a category. And it made me mindful of the fact that we failed to mention that the DAISY Data System Framework has a self-assessment component, or a component where you can measure yourself against the content of that framework to see where your focus might need to be in that area. So thanks for bringing that back to our attention. We understand that the reality of putting a data system in place is often looks like the right side of this figure. And of course, we want it to look like the left, point to point, but it doesn't always work that way. To the extent that you can plan for, get all the assistance you need, you can make that squiggly reality looking figure much more streamlined and much more point to point. Yeah, it'll be a little more circumvented than that, and it'll meander around a little bit, but hopefully you won't get bogged down into too many of the complexities that can happen in the design of a new data system. We have been there, we have done that, and we can help you through it, whether again it's the new one or an enhancement, and we'd love to do that with you. This is also a plug and a reminder that there will be an evaluation of this session along with every other session that you attend at DAISY. Please complete that. It's an important piece for us, and it's an important piece for our project as well. We want to thank you for all your time, your effort that you gave to this. We understand your challenges that you have, and we look forward to seeing you not only at another data session during IDIO, but also helping you with your own work. So thank you again for your time, and have a great rest of your day.